So maybe about a month ago or so, I put a post on one of the local Facebook groups. Um, Constantly seem to be driven to try to become involved in very small food production, be that gardens or community gardens, small urban market gardens, something of that nature. I mean, I did grow up on a industrial, conventional row crop farm, driving big tractors and stuff. Most of y'all may know that, you may not. It really doesn't matter in the big scheme of things. But I'm just constantly, it's on my mind. It's almost an obsession the last few years. So I put this post out there, just another attempt to try to garner some interest from whoever may be out there this may resonate with at the moment. And I've put it out there in many different ways. I've put challenges out saying, hey, if you believe you are truly food insecure and you want to make a change and you want that to change and you're willing to put forth effort, you're not looking for a handout, you're not looking for free food, you're willing to change what you do, how you do it, what you eat, where you look for your food, how you learn to cook if you don't know how to cook, all this kind of stuff. If you're serious about that, contact me. I'll help you. I have yet to ever have anybody take me up on that. Not seriously. So the current iteration, I was thinking, well, what about a nonprofit? I've been reticent to ever be involved in especially starting up a nonprofit. I had an opportunity to maybe do that back around 2006 to 2012 when I was a co-founder and pipe major of a community bagpipe band here in Jonesboro. I was actually living 50 miles away, and one or more days a week would come over here for practices, rehearsals, lessons, things of that nature. But I didn't want to do a nonprofit with that organization. It allows the government to have a foot in the doorway as to what you do, how you do it, and who you allow in. And we wanted to maintain complete control, and I didn't see the main advantage of a 501c. We were an Arkansas nonprofit, but not a federal 501c. The advantage of the 501c is typically access to money, especially from larger donors and institutions that can take it as a tax write-off and some things like that. And it just wasn't worth the trade-off. But for this, it might be, because it might help give access to land. So anyway, I put that post out there. Had a few little, people interested or whatever join that Facebook group. But then I got contacted by a local reporter for a digital media outlet, not Facebook or anything like that, an actual newspaper, but it's a digital, not necessarily a print one, that wanted to interview me. Okay, this could be good. So after a couple of back and forths and kind of setting a date and a time, which is in a couple of days, I thought, well, it might be helpful, because I don't know how much time she's going to have or be willing to spend listening to me just jabber on about gardening, food, anti-pesticide, anti-tillage, just going on a rant. So I thought, well, let me put something together and send her a few days ahead of time that might have a lot of the background information. And then from that, she would have something maybe for more pointed questions on what she's interested in, what she might want to put on in whatever the article or whatever the thing is. So I sat down and just started working on it. And it was within one day. I probably had about 2 hours all told in writing this. And it ended up 10 pages long with no graphics, no pictures or anything, just pure text. So I sent that to her, and I realized later do as much polishing as I should have. But this is not for direct publication. So hopefully she'll forgive me. I have cleaned it up a little bit. But Anyway, I haven't put out a video for a while, so I thought, well, I'll just read this to you if I can. So I titled it A Frank Discussion About Food and Food Production. With so many potential topics regarding food, its production, distribution, quality, quantity, cultural significance, emotional connections, and more, where to start? We know that food is a necessity for life. Its quality and quantity available are a direct determinant of one or more species' population. With more food, the population goes up. A sudden drop in availability, and the population crashes through disease and starvation, as well as increases in aggression, population migration, and in the case of the peculiar species of humans, war. Most curiously, humans, to the best of my knowledge, and I'm no biologist, are the only species that can and does directly manipulate both the quantity and quality of our food supply. Sure, there are ants that herd aphids for their honeydew, primates that appear to use tools in food collection, as well as traveling outside their typical territory to seek out specific plants which are ingested for medicinal purposes, such as antiparasitics. However, for the most part, no other species, plant or animal, despite being able to hunt, lure, and even participate in underground economies of trade, such as sugars to bacteria and fungi for water and nutrients, actively reconfigures the landscape, plans what to produce, purposefully moves as many plants, animals, and seeds from continent to continent, or eagerly engages in breeding programs and now cross-species genetic manipulation for increased production, though one may question the production of what? Product, power, or profit. Hoping to keep the discussion on the logical plane and attempt to keep the distraction of emotions off to the side, at least for the moment, I guess the most obvious first step is a definition and then a question. Food. Noun. Number 1. Material, usually of plant or animal origin, that contains or consists of essential body nutrients such as carbohydrates, fats, proteins, vitamins, or minerals, and is ingested and assimilated by an organism to produce energy, stimulate growth, and maintain life. Number 2. A specified kind of nourishment, such as breakfast food, plant food. Number 3. Nourishment eaten in solid form, quote, food and drink. That's from the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language, 5th edition. So there's our definition. And now the question. Why do we eat? I see nothing in the definition which would lead me to believe the purpose of ingesting food is simply to fill a void. We could find a completely inert substance, put it into a form that would pass through our mouth, down the esophagus, into the stomach, be acted upon by all the acids, enzymes, and billions of bacteria, continuing through the small and large intestine, eventually exiting, and call it food. However, unless somewhere along that path something useful is transferred from that substance to our metabolism, which is useful for energy, healing, or structural building, is it food? If it has a positive exchange, it's food. If it is a negative exchange, something that moves us from ease to dis-ease, then it is a poison or a pathogen. If it does nothing, then it's more or less just filler. So I ask again, why do we eat? We eat to live, to grow, to heal, and for energy. True, we also eat in pairs or larger groups to build community, to grow social bonds, and for other cultural reasons. But at the very basic level, we eat to live. With that as a foundation, what matters most is the quality of what we ingest, as quality leads directly to what quantity is required to achieve the desired results. Now, What determines quality? First, if it makes us ill, then obviously it is of low quality. In fact, it may be considered poisonous or pathogenic. If we desire health, it should be obvious that the reduction or elimination of poisons is a given. And yes, as a registered nurse, I understand for many substances there is a fine line between medicine and poison. Thus, at a simple level, that which determines its quality is what we collectively call nutrition. Hence, we eat to gain nutrition. Now, that's a bit of a journey in a lot of words to simply place a marker at the starting point of a discussion, no? But every journey must have a starting point. For how can you know you have taken a journey unless you can see that where you are is not where you started? Did we not learn from Bilbo Baggins? It's a dangerous business, Frodo, going out your door. You step out onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you may be swept off to. J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. So with that starting marker firmly in place, a quick diversion to how many interviews begin. Who am I? From whence do I hail? What, if any, are my qualifications? What is my message, so to speak? And why should you care? So background. Born in the mid-60s on an Air Force base in Texas. We moved to Brindisi, Italy, lived there for about 2 years, and returned before age 3. So I don't remember it, but I do have a strange affinity for pasta. I grew up in a small farming community of Alicia, about 20 miles west of Jonesboro, where I am now, and attended Walnut Ridge Public Schools. I attended Arkansas State University as a legacy, received a BS in psychology, as well as was a 1-year walk-on in the marching band, 2 to 3 years as a cheerleader, one of the original 12 that founded the ASU chapter of Sigma Chi fraternity, which I never fully joined. Long story there. Growing up in that small community, it was difficult to separate family from community, and there really was no them or they when something needed to be done. My father was an unpaid mayor for many years. We were all on the little one-engine fire department. If there was a water line break anywhere in town, whoever could and had a backhoe or a shovel showed up to get it fixed. The attitude was, it needs to be done. I'm the one here, and so it's my responsibility to at least try. I worked in mental health for a bit in what is now called St. Bernard's Behavioral Health Facility, was then called Greenleaf, on the Adolescent Psychiatric Substance Abuse Unit. Following that, I did a little over a year as a neuropsychological technician, administering a series of standardized tests such as the MMPI, Wechsler Intelligence Test, and a bunch of others. Having proven some aptitude in computers, a college friend talked me into applying for a job on a help desk with an international insurance company, Sedgwick James, headquartered in Memphis. I got hired. I moved to Marion in Arkansas and worked in IT for 15 years at Sedgwick James, Marsh & McLennan, and International Paper. Curiously, I was with Marsh & McLennan in 2000 when they decided to move all the information technology to New York City. If I wanted to keep my job, I'd have to move. I declined and went to International Paper. Had I kept my job and moved, I would have been at work at the top of one of the trade centers on 9/11. After being downsized from IT and acknowledging I was the sole surviving child, my sister was killed in a farming-related accident while we were in high school, with 2 aging parents, and from previous experience in healthcare, I knew that doctors and nurses don't pay much attention to nerds, IT people. So I went to nursing school, became an LPN, and then an RN. Most of my nursing was in hospice, with some ER at the Med in Memphis, LTAC, and preschool mixed in. All during the above, I'd been a firefighter, an EMT, part-time law enforcement officer very briefly. I had 80 hours of flight training. I fly a paramotor. I have a commercial drone license. I was a competitive Scottish Highland bagpipe player around the southeast U.S. I was pipe major of a community band, Northeast Arkansas Caledonian Pipes and Drums from 2006 to 2012. I have a permaculture design certificate from Oregon State University. I completed the soil food web training, which is not cheap, under Dr. Elaine Ingham, where soil is evaluated based on microscopic life, not chemical analysis, using acids and other means. I completed the essential rainwater harvesting training from Verge Permaculture in Canada. Rob and Michelle Avis, who are mechanical engineers, and Dr. Peter Coombs from Australia. And a bunch of other bits and bobs of self-directed study and experience, mainly related to food production, soil regeneration, and permaculture over the last 10 years or so. The main point of this list is not self-promotion, but hoping to indicate I come to most topics from multiple viewpoints. I didn't graduate high school, get a job or a degree, and stay in this narrow silo for the next 4 decades. Being able to make connections, such as how similar a chemical soil test, as done by the Extension Service, is to a blood test result from a doctor, and how your garden or farm doesn't end 2 feet above the soil, that all that smoke going up into the air is affecting aircraft and other people's breathing air. Or how chemicals used on crops, much like medications, don't have side effects. They have effects, intended or not. You may spray to kill this bug or that weed, but it affects many other species and often persists beyond processing and preparation into the food and the excrement of the animal or your child. That herbicide, which acts as a hormone disruptor, affects the hormones of developing children with untold long-term effects. The journey. I basically did the typical American thing: high school, university, employment. Trying to get that higher paycheck, more toys, perhaps a relationship or two, squeezing in a bit of the search for significance when possible and tolerable. I was living in Marion, Arkansas, and working in Memphis. The main reason to stay in Arkansas was that Marion had a volunteer fire department. I had always been on a department, and I wanted to continue. So that was the closest one to work, still in Arkansas. I eventually bought a small 1,000-square-foot house on a corner right in the middle of town, mowing the yard and all of that. At some point, remembering my youth, I decided to start a garden. I bought the tiller, pulverized an area, as is the norm today, and started gardening. Fertilizers, 7 Dust, all the potions, lotions, sprays, and such. Tomatoes were over my head, and baskets of veggies given to the neighbors. Then I read about root stout, lasagna gardening, no-till, and down the rabbit holes I went. Permaculture, something that was started in the 70s in Australia by Bill Mollison and Dave Holmgren, came to my attention. I'll say more about permaculture specifically in a bit. As I expanded the garden, I reduced and eventually eliminated the chemicals and the tillage. By the time 2020 hit and the panic of empty store shelves and fear at being near anyone, I had on my little corner lot up to 30 laying hens, at most 15 beehives, multiple kinds of berries, fruit trees, perennial veg of all kinds in the front yard as well as the side and the back. One could not be outside in my yard and be more than 2 or 3 steps from something edible. This was permaculture-inspired edible landscaping in the neighborhood's face. Between my home garden, a community garden on city land for 3 years, and another 3-acre plot that I could use as I wished for free on a handshake deal as long as I kept it mowed and neat, while others feared empty shelves and little to eat, I barely noticed. I built a relationship with the tree service, and we get 20 plus large truckloads of well-chipped wood chips a year between the 3 gardens. And the city had a trailer that sucked up leaves in the fall, which they would dump at the community garden, and I would spread by hand. I also drove around in my 86 pickup with a 14-foot trailer scarfing bags of leaves from the curbs all over town. Seeing my parents, who lived here in Jonesboro, were aging and becoming less mobile and such, and I'm the only surviving child, as well as trying to manage 3 gardens scattered around town, I began looking for and eventually 6.5 acres between Jonesboro and Harrisburg on the ridge, which is totally wooded. I could consolidate all my gardening efforts into one property, as well as have room to expand and see how much of this permaculture stuff I could put into practice, all while being 5 times closer to my parents should they need me on short notice. However, before I could get much of anything accomplished, I came over to stay with my mother while Dad was in the hospital and haven't been able to leave. It's been almost 3 years. My schedule and life are completely dependent on their needs and immediate health status for the foreseeable future. I get out of the house when I can to work on my off-grid permaculture playground homestead and try to find ways to engage with the community, acknowledging the ability to commit to specified dates and times is almost non-existent. The problem as I see it. So we have who I am, how I got here, with a stake in the sand as a starting point. Where to from here? What is the quest, and why did my mind just show me a scene from Monty Python's Holy Grail? Our nation, the Western world, is in horrible shape health-wise. Instead of taking the whole thing out of gear, tapping the brakes, possibly making a turn in another direction, we've welded the shifter in place, glued the accelerator to the floor, and tried to push the button for the nitrous, all while encouraging or trying to force the rest of the world to follow suit. I kind of knew this even from middle school health class, but 2 nursing programs, working in an ER and hospice, along with a lot of other observations and experience, have reinforced the opinion that health begins and ends with nutrition. One cannot be healthy and malnourished. One cannot be ill and regain health without good nutrition. Yet other than the paltry nutrition facts on the packaging of processed foods, it's rarely really talked about and considered, much less acted on. A package can have a list of major nutrients and calories, a list of unpronounceable ingredients, many of which obfuscate what they really are, and no mention at all of the pesticide, herbicide, fungicide residuals in small print on the back, while claiming in bold letters and pretty colors on the front, can be a part of a heart-healthy diet. We supposedly have a food insecurity, food deserts, and an obesity crisis at the same time, in the same place, often in the same people. Something in that does not make sense to this Arkansas farm boy. The dietary advice from our healthcare professionals tends to be essentially less salt, fewer calories, more green stuff, yada, yada, yada. This coming from people who, in 8 to 12 years of medical training of whatever type, may have had a couple of lectures on actual nutrition, how food is grown and produced in a way that assures it's healthy, and how to cook it without destroying the potential health benefits. Hint, deep frying everything isn't the answer. Just as an aside, pay attention to your healthcare professionals. How many of them are actually healthy versus on multiple medications for chronic conditions, anxiety, and obesity? I'm not being judgmental. I'm just willing to state the obvious. We claim that food is too expensive, when according to the World Economic Forum, and one can find statistics to bolster any claim if you try, the U.S. spends about 6.4% of household income on food, on average. We are one of only 8 countries on Earth that spends less than 10% of household income on food. It is not at all unusual in many countries to spend 30 to 50% or more of household income on food. Again, leave the emotion at the door and look at the data. Perhaps that is why we place so little value on food or its quality. It's a commodity. We think of our food in the same way as tools purchased at Harbor Freight or any other use once and dispose of item. Perhaps if we had to be more judicious with our dollar, we might pay more attention to what we place in our children's stomachs. I've asked the question before, which has offended some. If a person claims to be food insecure, I ask if they have a lawnmower, and if so, do they use it? The implication is, if you have a lawnmower and use it, you obviously have access to land, sunlight, and water. Otherwise, there would be no grass requiring mowing. Now, having that lawnmower means money was spent on the mower. Gasoline, oil, possibly a filter, grass seed, likely some weed and feed, which is fertilizer and a herbicide poison. And of course, the time and energy to run the mower. Or perhaps someone's hired just to mow an edge and all the chemicals to keep it golf putting green perfect. The follow-up question is, if you and perhaps your kids are food insecure, why are you growing grass? That which is required to grow grass could grow nutrition, food. Now this deserves a quick peek down a rabbit hole. What is the origin of the lawn? What is it? Where does it come from? To the best of my knowledge, a lawn, as we know it, has its origins in Europe, in the very wealthy class, as a conspicuous display of wealth. The rich and powerful people were so wealthy that they could afford to take land out of production, be those crops, timber, pasture, for purely ornamental use. And they had the manpower, as slaves, servants, employees, to maintain it as such. Thus, here in the U.S., we have taken this conspicuous display of wealth from a rare showing to something which is socially, if not legislatively, mandatory. We literally have areas of towns and cities where if a family has an unpaved area around their house or apartment, and they are at or below the poverty line, they may still yet be fined by the municipality if a somewhat neat lawn is not on display. There are ordinances in many places against the growing of food in a way that's visible from the street and deemed unkempt, even if the family's on public assistance for food. I could go off on churches and the acres of manicured lawn, indicating obvious, significant line items in the budget for landscaping, when I'm aware of no Bible verse advocating such displays of wealth, overfeeding the poor, or working together for the harvest. But that's a detour for another time. I can take issue with food pantries and food giveaways of many kinds, which, while admirable and sometimes needed for a short term to help an individual or family through an acute phase, do nothing at all to solve hunger in the long run, and actually contribute to it and create even more waste. I'll give you examples on request. Here's a way to look at these institutions. Imagine if one could magically make hunger disappear. What would these organizations do? What would the people who are so invested in them and the growth of the program do? I'd say most cannot even conceive of that occurring. I listen to the advertisements for the various programs, which, as I said, purport to exist to solve hunger, claiming success because they're giving out more food than the previous year. Maybe I shouldn't have passed that statistics class, but if the stated goal is to achieve 0, how can the number increasing be considered progress? It can't, but it's the nature of every organization. whether a political body, religious body, social body, business, or other entity. Once it exists, it is a living organism whose primary mission is to continue to exist and grow. It is a rare entity or person indeed who actively and honestly endeavors to work itself out of existence by meeting the goal to the point they are no longer needed. But this does occur in nature, strangely. Ask me about weeds. So, the problem, as I see it, is we are essentially nutritional hypocrites, at least in our culture. We say we value health when we eat as if we don't. We wail and moan about the cost of food when we pay our worldwide paucity of food and with decreasing nutritional content. It is said that 40% of that which is produced, which could be eaten in some way, somewhere along the path between harvest and either consumption or the trash bin, is wasted. This means that with just 60% consumed, barely more than half of what is produced, which could be consumed, we still have an obesity epidemic. We don't need more low-quality food produced. We actually need less produced, valued better, and distributed much better. Our current primary model of food production is extractive and destroys the land because we seem to think that every square foot of land somewhere out there away from town or the city, because it's dirty and smelly, needs to be in production and cranking out as much as possible, even if we admit the 40% is just going to end up in a landfill rather than being returned to the soil in some way. The solution, or at least a small piece of it, the solution, at least the part I want to be a part of, first boils down to personal responsibility. It is the responsibility of each adult who is competent to feed themselves and to take ownership of the quality of what they feed themselves, even more what they feed their family. This responsibility should outweigh recreation, fashion, and all the other ephemeral social fashions. We should pay at least as much or more attention and care to picking out the components of a meal as we do a movie or outfit which may be worn a couple times at most. A return to actual cooking. The family meal is almost extinct in many parts of the U.S. and the West. This event is a primary way of establishing and continuing the familiar bonds, especially between generations. Even more so, the shared preparation of that meal, the stories and recipes shared around the stove and the oven, the selection of ingredients, possibly even the production, all combine to repair the shattered families of the last few generations. Beyond the family, community meals, the hospitality of strangers, and shared labor in the garden or field likewise glue a society together. While sports may bring people together, the participants more than the spectators, nothing adds more to a culture than cuisine, born from local, seasonal products and prepared by those you know. I've heard it said it's difficult to have someone as an enemy who has broken bread at your table. I drive around Jonesboro and the surrounding area, and I see all the open green spaces, hearing the echoes of advertisements of high food costs, food deserts, food insecurity, and declining health, and just shake my head. Fresh food is healthier. It's about nutrition, not calories. Nutrition is easier to grow and takes less space than calories, leafy greens versus sweet corn. If you have room and resources for a lawn, you have what you need for a garden. If a grocery store is too far away, be a part of your own grocery store. Most families have enough food waste to feed a couple of chickens. Less garbage, more food. Basic cooking skills can turn less expensive bulk staples into any number of nutritious dishes. Growing, cooking, and eating together is better for a family than microwaving dishes in separate rooms. The plan. The hope or plan is to find perhaps 5 people of very similar minds and goals to eventually form a 501c corporation. Not because I believe it's needed to do the work, but because while it, unfortunately, allows the foot of government into the doorway, it also opens more doors for attention and access to resources, such as possibly land, without having to be fully funded out of pocket. There only need to be 3 unrelated individuals to form the corporation, but having at least 5 to start out with allows the possible loss of 1 or 2 while continuing progress. The focus of the corporation is education, demonstration, and access, however, in a way that fosters and emphasizes personal action and responsibility. We could start or assist in starting a variety of gardens when and where there is demonstrated interest and opportunity. These may include community gardens allotment. This is an area of land divided into smaller plots that are rented out to people who may not have access to land otherwise, or who just want to garden in close proximity to others. This is more of a European or big city version. The fee for the allotment goes to upkeep, infrastructure, perhaps bringing in quality compost in bulk, tool loans, classes, etc. These could be anywhere, but to serve some who may need it most, need to be within walking distance or at least very convenient on an almost daily basis. I actually would love to see it as a routine amenity at apartment complexes rather than all the open space just being chemically treated lawn. Or perhaps in some of that landscaping at a church or next to hospitals and other facilities who purport to promote health, rather than the pharmacy and fast food, which is normally just outside, if not actually inside the building. Urban market gardens. By teaching gardening and possibly some business topics, encourage those who may want or need a side hustle to take portions of their yard or whatever land can be accessed into small market gardens, selling them directly to the neighborhood, making use of the 2021 Arkansas Food Freedom Act, as well as at existing or newly created farmers markets located where the need is. Perhaps using the nonprofit, some of this land could even become available, which would be leased to the budding farmer, and either have them rotate off that property if they find their own, or even an option to purchase the leased land, and we then go find other property. Demonstration and consultation. Using the community gardens or other outlets, teach and demonstrate various ways of gardening in containers, raised beds, possibly handicap accessible, worm bins, backyard chickens, etc., in a way that requires the person to actually do the work. There may be minimal cost or work trade in the same way as Habitat for Humanity. Emphasize preparation and preservation. We can do all the above and grow stuff, but the ultimate goal is consumption. Soil to plate. This is not an ornamental garden, though many ornamentals have an important place in the edible garden by providing habitat and food for predators and pollinators. I realize that much of this sounds like what is done by the various county extension offices, divisions, master gardeners, of which I am a part of at least this year. However, my hope is to keep it more focused on the local needs and away from the potential political interest and red tape. I don't want to feed the world, and I find that phrase incredibly deceptive. It's a way to continue the get big or get out green revolution thinking of the Nixon and Earl Butz era. And I've got a personal story about that if you're ever interested. Getting bigger and putting more control of food in fewer hands is not the answer from any vantage point, unless you are one of those few. It may be efficient, but efficiency is the opposite of resilience. And I'm interested in resilience and health. I'm interested in feeding myself and my family very, very well. Perhaps feeding my extended family and neighbors. And maybe the little community of Alicia someday. If I can do that, I'd take it. If there were hundreds and thousands of such micro-urban farmers, things like 2020 would have been barely noticed as far as food scarcity goes. Now, a very quick word about permaculture. There are literally multi-volume sets of books on this topic. But at a high level, permaculture is not a gardening style. It is a design system, first conceived of in relation to growing food, but applicable to everything from building a house, a community, a company, or many other things. First and foremost, it's based on 3 ethics. They may be stated in multiple ways, but I go with 1. Care of the earth. 2. Care of people. 3. Return of surplus. Briefly, they can be defined as, and are in this order for a reason. Number 1, care of the earth. If whatever you're considering doing does not leave the soil or earth better, then don't do it. Thus, conventional industrial farming does not meet this ethic, as it degrades the soil, water, and ecological diversity, etc. Number 2, care of people. If, and only if, ethic 1 is met, then will this thing that we're thinking about doing provide something needed for people? Food, fiber, housing, beauty, spiritual, etc. If it does not meet a human need, then why do it? Leave it alone. Let nature, which has a much better track record than humans, take care of it. Number 3, return of surplus. Again, if the 2 above have been met, and only if they have been met, consider this ethic. What this ethic means is, achieving the first 2, expect abundance. More of whatever is produced than is actually needed. Thus, this surplus needs to be returned to the system which created it. Much like compound interest goes back into the account to accrue more monetary interest. The abundance creates ever-increasing abundance. Removing it from the system is extractive and degrades the system. Following the ethics, there are a number of principles, and these get added to, reworded, and expanded by a great number of practitioners. A few of them may be: obtain a yield. If you're not getting something from the action, why do it? Every need is met by more than one source. Basic resiliency. 3 is 2, 2 is 1, and 1 is none. Never have the entire need or enterprise dependent on a single point of failure. Every entity meets multiple needs. If a plant is there solely to look good, it's a waste of space and resources. It needs to, for instance, look pretty, be edible by humans, be edible by animals, provide mulch, provide compost material, be a windbreak, provide shade in the heat of summer, loosen the soil, etc. At least 2 of these or other needs, and the more needs it meets, the better. And there are many more principles. Then we get to zones and sector analysis, and only after all of that do we get to specific techniques such as herb spirals, swales and berms, hugelkultur, and the like. I hope this is not overwhelming and is something I threw together after our brief Facebook Messenger conversation setting a meeting time and location. I did this exercise mainly as a way to get my thoughts together and hopefully provide a bit of pre-meeting context and thoughts. I could go on probably for hours on many of these ideas and topics. The primary holdup for me over the last 3 years has been family obligation, but it does not diminish the drive and the imagination. Hopefully, in a decade or so, we can have one of those instant successes that seem to arise. Thank you.